they do get the tax break. I'm justifying it because they contribute in terms of taxes and also contributing as being a good business to the community, to the nonprofits in Middleborough.
If it's meaningful to anybody, my understanding is that between our assessor, Barbara Erickson, I'm sorry, the Office of the Assessors, yourself, the town planner, and a number of other people that have dealt with Brookfield, their belief and understanding is they are a very good member of the community, and they support and trust that these people will continue even with this type of fuzzy language. That's my understanding of what their positions are. Obviously, the board takes whatever position it wants, but I wanted to mention that there are a number of our key department heads on this issue that seem to believe this is worth doing in keeping Brookfield. Please let me know if I'm wrong, Barbara.
You're right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, on the contrarian view, we have
we
have a large nonprofit, and it's known as the town of Middleborough, that entered into an agreement with an employer for a tax benefit that isn't being met. So I don't know how you don't start a run on everybody else that said, well, the economic times. I mean, lean manufacturing, you clearly knew that you weren't going to increase employment by doing lean manufacturing. The idea is to go lean, to eliminate employees and do it through automation. So I don't know how this isn't.
That wasn't initial. That occurred during after the TIF agreement. There was a change in administration, in the CFO and administrative staff. So that wasn't something that occurred right away. I mean.
Well, I would doubt if the organization, and I could be wrong, Brookfield Engineering would move for $11,000 worth of tax revenue.
One thing that I will comment on as far as the TIF agreement itself, it is over halfway through the TIF agreement that they have with the town. They're on the downward turn now as far as what their exemption they're getting. Last year they received a 15% exemption. Fiscal 2009 they'll also receive a 15% exemption. Then the next 2 years it drops down to 10%, it drops down to 5%, and then the very last year is 0. So they are their exemption is getting smaller and smaller every year.
We're at the profitable backload.
We are, yes. And, I understand what Selectman Spataro is saying, and that is something when the new companies are coming in for the TIFs, where we're changing that, where we're not putting a number of employees that they have to hire over the length of the TIF, because that's very hard to do, especially with the economy, flip-flopping. I know our last one with Holiday Inn Express, Mr. Bond fought very hard to get a percentage of their payroll that was attributable to Middleborough employees, and I think that's the way that the committee is probably going to be going from this point forward.
Any further comment? Pleasure of the board? Or displeasure of the board? Oh, I'm sorry. Please.
I'm Barbara Frappier. I'd like to make a comment because I've always had a little bit of a bug up my nose about these TIFs. It seems to me that we're always giving the percentage in the tax breaks, and all too often I'm seeing that the deal isn't being honored on the other side. I don't know Brookfield. They may be a very good company. I certainly do know the economic times, but I see that we're taking this TIF agreement and making it very loose in an area that was very specific. And if I were another company on TIFs and I was having the same problems, everyone is having economic problems, I would be coming to you too for similar relaxation of my TIF agreement. And I think relaxation of the TIF agreement would be fine, but on the other hand, I think the companies should be prepared to relax their end of the bargain. So if perhaps the 15% ought to extend a little bit longer, or but I don't think it should be one way, and I agree with Mr. Spataro, we are a nonprofit as well. And an extra $10,000 might make a difference to some department for something that was very vital to them. And I would hope that you would not support this, or if you did, would have it amended in such a way that the town was benefiting.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment on that. I believe that Brookfield Engineering, their TIF agreement they had with the town was the only business that actually had specific numbers in there. Everything else was very vague. They all have been that way.
I believe they were all, that they will give preference or attempt to give preference, and
That's correct.
and these were, that was the one tied to employees as opposed to payroll, and that's a lot harder to meet.
That's correct.
But what if they, I mean, for example, taking Ms. Frappier's point of view, what if they agreed to a percentage of payroll, being Middleborough? I mean, why, I think what her point is, and what Steve's point is why give up the ship, as opposed to shifting back to a paradigm that you already believe works on the Holiday Inn Express paradigm, which is, okay, you guys are short employees, well, what percentage of your payroll is coming to Middleborough? I mean, that's the type of thing you're talking about. Why just throw it out? But before we get to you, Mr. Rosenthal, I think Anna has something to say.
Well, as I mentioned, that's the point of having a TIF committee. I get input, and it's not my decision alone, and I'm open to hearing what suggestions you might have.
I'm sorry I wasn't at the last meeting.
Oh, that's okay. But I can understand also what Mr. Spataro is saying in reference. I want you to keep in mind that there was a period of time that we didn't monitor them as closely. I'm trying to get back to monitoring these TIF agreements more closely. There was a little lull period, and I'm working very hard. And I will have shortly for you a spreadsheet with all the details on all the TIFs for you.
Mr. Rosenthal, if you want to come up here, you're more than free to. You're hard to see back there because you're so small.
One question I had was whether or not altering this agreement will start the clock running again. Does anyone know the answer to that? No. It won't start the clock. Basically, the major reason these folks need these TIFs and that we're an economic target area, the real benefit to them is they get more of a break from the state.
The 5%
than they do from us. And what do we have to actually give in order for them to get the manufacturing credit from the state? Is it a 5 instead of a 3 that they get? 5% instead of 3%? And that's significant. And I think we have to give something in order to get that. Yes. But it doesn't necessarily have to be what we gave in the past. And frankly, in the days when I was on the TIF committees, we kept reducing the amount of a tax break that they actually would get from the town. So I guess in the TIFs that we're considering now, there's very little in terms of an actual tax break. Am I right?
Well, we haven't had, since I've been here, there haven't been any new TIFs.
Yeah.
There are a couple, I will say that there are a couple businesses that are
Go ahead.
in the parks. It's not. I'm going to be calling the TIF committee again together because there are a couple businesses that expressed an interest in learning more about the TIFs and what we can offer.
Does anybody else have any further comment or question? Did you have a comment, Mr. McKinnon?
I happen to have a 2006
Mr.
summary.
McKinnon is from the Finance Committee. It's just easier for people to know.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I have a 2006 summary here. There are 10 TIFs, say that 3 times fast. 5 of them, the conditions of agreement are for priority in hiring